Hello and welcome to CDW's Tech Talks. This is the podcast where we dig into technology trends and practical insights that shape how organizations are using technology to solve real business problems. I'm your host for today's episode, KJ Burke, Field CTO for Hybrid Infrastructure at CDW Canada. Each episode, we break down a topic in the world of business IT and show you how to leverage those concepts in your organization. So stick around until the end of the episode for our tech tip of the week, a simple, actionable takeaway from this content that you can use in your everyday and ever-changing mental model. So today I wanted to talk a little bit about getting beyond the chatbots. Really, when we're talking about AI, we're doing a lot of these conversations with customers, and it really becomes how do we get past a chat type of an interface into more acting? And sometimes you hear people talk about agentic, but there's some steps that we can talk about in between there. So first of all, address the one of the elephants in the room, which is AI fatigue. We're tired of hearing about AI. I joke that, the two terms that people are most tired about, three terms most people are most tired of hearing about are digital transformation, AI, and zero trust. And I think each of those is really important, but we need to make them more actionable. And we have to stop talking about the hype and really start talking about more of the practicality and how do we get value out of these. So AI fatigue is definitely something to address. And I'm not here to just bring you another sort of high level conceptual art of the possible. Let's kind of dig into what people are doing and how they are starting to take advantage. So most people think that AI is really just sort of a box where you're chatting, and chatbots have been great, but they've also created sort of a limitation around how we view AI, and I think that is really to our detriment. So chatbots, great. That's one sort of function for AI, and you can chat and really engage in this sort of back and forth. Now, in the business day, if you had an eager intern, let's say that your chatbot is kind of like an eager intern, if they were constantly coming to you, needing you to direct them. It becomes a second job managing that person, and chatbots are kind of the same way. You can get a lot of value out of them, but it is pretty intensive from your time to engage. If you aren't already moving towards the idea of moving past chatbots, building contextual understanding into the way you're using AI, here's some pillars that we can really use to separate the toys from the tools. So segment one is really around chatbots and prompt engineering. And so, chatbot and the interface that you're interacting with is really just a digital skin. It's just the UI that you are using to, access the foundation model, whether that's, Azure AI, whether that's Claude, whether that's ChatGPT, whether that's Grok. You really have a user interface that most people are using. Developers and people that are building applications are also building API connectivity into that as well. We'll kind of get into that as we go. But it's very reactive, and I like to really compare it to almost like a tennis match, or I guess modern equivalent is pickleball, where you're going to ask it something, it's going to give it back. You're going to ask something, it's going to give it back, and you're going to refine it, and you're going to get it back. And one of the limitations that we have with a lot of public chatbots is we're left sometimes trying to fine tune the information, fine tune the picture, fine tune the content that's being created. And it's very challenging. And so again, this sort of back and forth and narrowing down to what you are really trying to accomplish can be very frustrating. For some people. The second really is around the prompt engineering. And one of the, again, limitations that a lot of people, this isn't their job. They're not data scientists. They're not, really skilled and haven't trained in the art of creating a good prompt. This can be very frustrating in the sense that you kind of get out of the chatbot what you put into the chatbot. If you're not specific, it can be very challenging to get the specific information that you're looking for. So as you're using chatbots, one of the things you can do is be very specific about who you're trying to communicate with, what is the information you need, draw boundaries around what you want it to research, draw boundaries around the ideas. Say, give me 5 examples of this, or can you list 2 reasons why? And that will sometimes help. You can also tell it to be concise. And then know who you're communicating with. So if you're trying to maybe take some of your information and communicate it to a different stakeholder, then specify the stakeholder that you're trying to communicate with. I'm preparing this for my CTO, preparing this for my CEO, I'm preparing this for my direct manager, and help it understand what your point of view is as well, so it knows kind of what it's translating to. The third pillar is pivoting. Um, it's narrowing the possibility and the space that the model's working in. So as you're working with chatbots, it's again around you know really drilling down on that specific information, that specific concept, specific idea. And then analogy. Analogy is really the idea of you're a director and you're sort of giving notes to the chatbots and really trying to help them understand um, the journey that you want that conversation note or that insight to take place on. So if we look at chatbots as really you're interacting with UI, you control some of the prompting. The service provider controls the other parts of the prompting. What is the system prompting? What is it the temperature? Temperature manages how much creativity and diversity you have in your answers. Understanding prompt engineering and understand how you can construct a good prompt. Sometimes it's really good to ask the chatbot to help you construct a good prompt. And then pivoting and understanding how you want the model to collate that information and communicate that information. And then think of it as an analogy. You're really trying to say, okay, well, help me build this insight into a story that I can, communicate to other people, and who is that stakeholder. So as you start to mature beyond just leveraging chatbots, one of the really interesting innovations, one of the things that's in a novel way is going to help you solve for some of the limitations, is really around context engineering. And as you look to maybe deploy your own chatbot, maybe you deploy a tool that allows you to deploy a chatbot in a Docker container on your PC ready or AI ready PC, or maybe you're doing that in your cloud environment, or maybe you're doing that on a server, in your data center. Um, Once you start to build up these workflows as opposed to have a chat interface, it opens up a bunch of other possibilities. And one of those big possibilities is contextual understanding. This is where you start to use things like retrieval-augmented generation, where I can actually give the model that I'm interacting with contextual information, and not just one, like a lot of enterprise RAG. You don't just have to give it one set of information. You can actually create a workflow of processes, and at different steps within that process, give it different information that's really specific for that step. You can also do things like change the system prompting. So when you are building out your relationship with these foundation models, one of the things you can do is give it additional instructions. And so you, as the application developer, you as the IT administrator that's looking to help your business deploy these workflow-based contextual applications, you get to give it understanding, and then your users don't necessarily have to provide that. So with prompt engineering, we're really relying on the person prompting to have a lot of information about how they want this to proceed, be able to explain that in a succinct way that the model can understand and then relate to. Whereas with contextual engineering and building some of that context into the engine and the mechanism of the application, you take that burden off of your users, and you again create a more repeatable, a more defined process that's more aligned with your organization, your data. And RAG's really one of the ways that you can do that. Another one that comes up is the idea of Miracle, MRKL. And what Miracle really is being able to do sort of the same thing, but really creating API calls, either direct API calls from the tooling, or with an MCP service that maybe is managing your API integrations. But you can then start to pull information from structured data sets. Maybe that's a SQL database, maybe that's a SaaS offering. But you give your application that you're building, this workflow, access to structured data so that it can, again, provide more value and move that forward. So it's not so much about what the language model knows. It's about all of the other potential information that you can give it, that really helps it be more productive and more understanding of your environment, that helps it be more effective. And as a person that's trying to help your organization develop these types of tools, the more structure you can build into it that takes the heavy lifting off of your users, the more likely they are to get the information out of the tool that you're really looking for them to get. Um, Another key part to that is once you build things out in more of a workflow, you can add things like guardrails. One of the things we really talk about quite a bit is you don't want people to misuse the AI tools that you're building. Sometimes AI tools will have access to additional information. We obviously are very opinionated about organizations doing their due diligence around curation of data, data security, data governance. But there's all sorts of data. We're all under pressure to move quickly, and sometimes we don't have the time that we would like to do all of our due diligence. And so, guardrails become a part of your workflow as both a validation. What is the user really asking your tool to do? And also validation on the output. Well, what is the information? What is the end result that we're giving the users as a response? And that can be guardrails from a cybersecurity perspective. That can be guardrails from a content perspective. It can also be things like QA. Like if we're using the tool to maybe generate a document, we want it to go through QA before we ever, send it out the door. And so, especially as we start to look at more automated ways of responding, having this layered approach, using task-specific data as we go through that workflow, and then having checks and balances with QA with guardrails becomes really important. So the third sort of, I would say, phase in this maturity, if you go from chatbots to more of a contextual build out of applications, is really the idea of agentic AI, and that fundamentally is going from tell me how to do something to go do something for me. And obviously, as we start to, automate these business processes, as we start to give either part of the process, part of the workflow, or where we feel very confident the entire workflow, the ability to actually go do the task, we need to be very certain about our data. We need to do more testing, and we need to be confident that there are checks and balances. There's QA. There's oversight built into those tools so that we can do that appropriately. And I use the example of would you use AI to construct an email, to all of your friends, inviting them to a birthday party without checking it? Probably not. I think it's getting better, and maybe that's a bad example as we go forward. But sometimes you want that personal touch. Sometimes you just want to have a human in the loop, and we just have to be comfortable with AI is not only about developing the tools; it's about developing tools that your users, your organization are comfortable with and can take advantage of. Because you could build the greatest tool imaginable, you could have all sorts of potential benefits from it, but if the organization isn't willing to take up that tool, if they're not comfortable with the way that the checks and balances and the guardrails and the security and the outputs are being created, and it never gets deployed, then unfortunately we spent a lot of time trying to get the business to innovate, but we forgot some of the basics and didn't do that. So agents are actually really able to touch other systems. There's some really interesting tools out there that you can use to get a good example of this. We work a lot with customers in Microsoft Azure, AWS, work with NVIDIA and their NIMS platforms, leveraging Nemo to build up some of these applications. But really, the idea is through these APIs, through these calls to these different systems, automating certain things, like maybe having an incident response agent that takes an error code, does a full research on that error code, comes back with a remediation plan, a change control plan, a rollback plan. Maybe that's something that integrates with your ticketing system and can automatically create the ticket and put all of that detail in there for your managed services or your network operations center, your security operations center. So the idea is, by moving into more of an agentic flow, we start to take those workflows that we've laid out, and then we're really finding ways to optimize and finding ways to use AI for each of those steps, where we give it a task and it comes back with an output, an action that is being done. So that's kind of the idea of the agentic side of the AI, and that becomes more successful as we look at some of the reasoning models and we look at being able to give it complex tasks. We'd be able to not just use tokens to generate data out of the model or out of the RAG databases, but We actually give it the ability to leverage tokens as a means of researching, double checking, doing all of the validation, and then coming back with a fully fleshed out response, even inclusive of confidence levels. So here is the recommended change. It's been put in the ticketing system, and the chatbot has validated across 30 different sources that it is the right activity to take. And so it has a 95% confidence that this will solve the problem, not cause an output outage, et cetera. And so again, building in those checks, building in those confidence checks, that's really important. And then the fourth sort of maturity stage in here is really integration. So how do we then take that and then scale it? And how do we sort of put some of these things together? For some instances, if I'm trying to plan out my day, or I'm trying to maybe put together a draft of an outline, maybe it's for a podcast. And I'm saying, hey, I just want to put together an outline to work through the topic. Here's where I'm at. Formulate this into a narrative for me. Can give me a starting point to build from. So there's a lot of value in that. And we recently did a leadership training, and one of the outputs from that was most of the office work that we do could be optimized by about 35%, just leveraging, chatbots, leveraging research assistants, leveraging the basic tools to, help us be more effective in our jobs. But if we look at, well, how can we use those to optimize part of what we're doing? And then how do we really help build those contextual applications so that we can help take these business processes and help optimize them. Maybe it's creation of a document, maybe it's legal review of a document, maybe it's being able to create a draft work order. It's how do we build some of our intelligence contextually into this workflow. There's a ton of value there. And then starting with, some low-hanging fruit, starting with, areas of activity where there isn't a huge impact to the business. So we can start to build confidence. We can start to build our skill set. We can start to build the desire of the organization to adopt some of these AI tools. That's where we can really start leveraging more of the agentic types of workflows. What is something that really takes up a bunch of time, is fairly straightforward to define the workflow. And we get a high level of success in our testing, leveraging, our application. So that's, kind of where we're going there. And then the future is really how we put all of these things together, create agents that have contextual awareness that, help us in our day to day, and take these highly repetitive tasks, make them, happen faster, take that off of our workers so we can spend more time really being focused on the business and what the business needs. There's a whole bunch of things that we do on a day-to-day basis that have to get done, but nobody, and I used to joke with this, like nobody ever got a promotion because the backups happened. So it has to happen. It's critical to the business. We need it for resiliency. Absolutely not taking anything away from backups and the people that take care of that. But it's kind of a thankless, unrecognized activity, unfortunately. So how can we, take these types of tools and really automate the process and automate the business with that? So, tech tip of the week is really to, take a look at what you're doing with AI. If you're really focused into chatbots, that's great. There's a bunch of productivity you can get out of that, but really start to dig into, how do I go to the next step? How do I start to go past just the generative AI? How do I start to leverage, maybe it's computer vision data, maybe it's language translation, maybe it's more, deep thinking or analytics and statistical analysis. And so really start to think about how I can go beyond that. And then start to think about leveraging AI in more of a contextual manner. So, maybe that SaaS offering doesn't understand your business as well as a contextual application you could build yourself. So what is that information? How do I start to gather that information, and how do I really build and start to lay out what that contextual understanding of these different tasks are, because that will help you accelerate. So when you are ready and the organization is ready to move forward, you've already started to identify that. So, map out something you do regularly, work and think about how you could use contextual data to make that more effective. And I'll see you next week. Thanks again.